Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Safran. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. I'm also a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. Today, we'll talk about some of my past work and ongoing work on the neuroimaging of human sexuality and what I think I've learned and what I'm hoping to learn. This work started to follow up on some interesting findings from the sexual psychophysiology literature. Meredith Chivers and colleagues discovered an interesting sex difference, or gender difference, in which while men showed highly category-specific patterns of subjective and genital arousal, women showed non-specific patterns. More specifically, men would show substantial elevated arousal to the category of sexual stimulus that they preferred. So if we're talking about homosexual men, this would be more for men than women. And if we're talking about heterosexual men, this would be more for women than men. Women, in contrast, showed substantially elevated subjective and genital arousal to both sexes. This finding has been replicated numerous times, and its significance is debated to this day. This work was carried out using physiological recordings and of direct genital measurements. Where I came in is I tried to extend this work and see if we could replicate the same patterns or not using functional magnetic resonance imaging. So towards this end, we gathered together a large study, I think the largest to date, of 155 bisexual, homosexual, and heterosexual women and men, and we showed them erotic images in the scanner. What we found is that the findings did indeed replicate. For men on the left, you'll see substantially elevated arousal or brain activity in the dopaminergic ventral striatum or nucleus accumbens, the reward system of the brain, which would be substantially elevated for preferred relative to non-preferred stimuli. So for heterosexual men up top, it's much greater for women than men. And for homosexual men down left, it's much greater for men than for women. Those are actually, I'm showing you uncorrected, statistically uncorrected data here. So those are actually the only two findings that were significant. Women, in contrast, did not show these kinds of highly specific patterns of arousal. So the genital psychophysiology literature, those findings also have been replicated using neuroimaging. So what does it mean? We still don't know. And I guess you could trivially say, well, you just showed that sex is rewarding. And yeah, that's it. But as I think Jim on this panel would relate to, yeah, that's the point. The same system used in motivation, used in reinforcement learning and selecting actions for any other kind of reward is also at the core of human sexuality. And so, well, what does that mean? Well, I believe what that means is that to a substantial degree, our sexuality, our sexual preferences, and potentially even our orientations are shaped by processes of reward-driven learning. And so very compatible with Jim's perspective and others, I've recently introduced a model where we start out with some sort of set of innate biases. We don't know what they are. And then people begin to have different kinds of affective sexual experiences. So things that feel better or feel worse. And so based on this, they learn things. And then the things that feel better, they prefer those over the things that feel worse. And then this influences subsequent patterns of action selection and behavior, causing new experiences and new learning. And then updating of the preferences based on what was rewarding or not. And then more experiences and then more learning. And so if this feedback loop between choosing the things you like, coming to like them, or choosing things, and then if you like them, choosing them more, and then from those experiences, if they're good, liking them even more, If this happens within sensitive periods of development and critical mass of learning occurs, then you may create an enduring sexual orientation. That's the model. As for innate stimuli, I used to think I would find this in the brain somewhere, like some sort of evolutionary engram, or like the circuits that are tuned right for mating selection, because surely natural selection wouldn't have left something as important as that to learning. But in studying different literatures and in studying the brain, I came to suspect that this isn't the case. It seems that for the innate basis of orientation, for most of evolution, it was the vomeronasal system, it was pheromones. But this actually became vestigial somewhere in moving from old world to, I think, old world monkeys, maybe like 50,000 years ago or somewhere around there. Actually, no, 50 million, let me say, actually, 50 million. But the point is, the business end of sexual orientation at some point just went away. The stabilizing selection for it just stopped. What I suggest is that general purpose learning systems became sophisticated enough that natural selection didn't need to micromanage things anymore. And in fact, it might have actually wanted to leave some flexibility in sexuality so that organisms could, a bit of time, doing okay. So that organisms could basically be more adaptive, so they could take into account more considerations. There's some interesting work by Kim Whalen that shows that rhesus macaques, they start out with equal amounts of bisexual play. They'll mount equally other males and other females. And after, but what will happen is that around puberty, they develop the ability to ejaculate and have monkey orgasms, and this additional reward. But their ability to do this is asymmetric. So it's easier to do this in the male-female cross-sex direction than it is within sex, partially because a variety of things, maybe it doesn't feel as good for them, or the body postures, the angles aren't right, or it doesn't work out as well. But this seems to be the thing that predicts the later emergence, and the only thing that predicts the later emergence of a specific sexual preference for these animals. And so, well, monkeys, they're fairly smart. And so this, or somewhere around there, as they became intelligent enough that they could just follow their pleasure and figure out how to realize it, the only thing that needed to be hardwired really was the body plans and maybe the postures that people would tend to take on and under different circumstances. And so the system for orienting became vestigial. I'd go further in that, I actually think that the visual systems in many ways necessarily soft-coded, right on time, is necessarily like soft-coded and not hardwired, and that you're building up this capacity for pattern recognition that requires experience to wire it up. And I've been looking for something that could constitute a neural mechanism for sexual orientation in the brain. And really the only thing that would fit the bill would have been pheromones. Otherwise, it doesn't seem there's anything that can do the job. So it seems that experience might be important and maybe even the only thing that goes into determining the way that our sexual preferences and perhaps orientations form. So Lisa Diamond has also introduced dynamic models, and she suggests this model or metaphor of a water flowing across a landscape and then carving out a riverbed. And then as rain falls onto this landscape, it will go through the grooves that have already been established, and the grooves will deepen. And then more rain comes, and then the grooves deepen even more. And through this way, this is a way she described that women's sexualities would change and be fluid and plastic over time. I suggest this is how we should think of all sexuality, all orientations, and where the orientedness might be a function of, did you achieve a substantial critical mass or a substantial critical mass of learning and experience during sensitive periods of development when you're young. That's not to say, there's like a window that it has to happen within, but there might be a period of time where if you get the right kind of learning, you can either establish a highly specific preference that's enduring and strong, we'd call this orientation, or you might not. And if you have less of a specific preference, well, then you might show more of a capacity for change across time. You might show more fluidity because your non-specific arousal, your less specific arousal would give you greater erotic plasticity or the capacity to adapt and experience pleasure across a wider range of situations. So for these models, I've recently written a book chapter with Victoria Klamai. Let's see, is she hidden? There she is. And this, I think, will be published soon. There I am again. And if you're interested in the details, please read it, and I'd love to talk about it with you. So there's also some ongoing empirical work that's happening in collaboration with Victoria also at Indiana University. And what we're doing is we're looking whether people who have non-specific arousal or maybe greater sexual fluidity, whether they might show more flexible brains. And so we're using this measure to see how dynamic someone's brain is by basically taking someone as they're in the scanner, looking at them at different windows of time, seeing what areas are talking to which, and then seeing whether people switch their communities or their cliques or who they're talking to across time. And so you might either never switch, in which case you're minimally flexible, or you might switch every time you look, in which case you're maximally flexible. So this measure is actually interestingly shown to correlate with psychological flexibility in other domains. And here I'm wondering, will it show up for sexuality? I suspect it will, but we haven't yet analyzed this data. But more generally, how am I doing on time? 2 minutes, all right. I think it would be good if we could move beyond just saying, move beyond just taking sexuality and sexual orientation and just saying, well, who do you like? How much, like, how specific are you? Do you like men? Do you like women? Do you, but there's more to sexuality. Sexuality shapes every aspect of your life, of our lives. It shapes our personalities. And so I'm interested in seeing whether, for instance, let's say we're talking about someone who's bisexual. Does this way of being in the world where you're navigating a broader range of social contexts, does this help you to be more psychologically flexible? Alternatively, and non-mutually exclusively, does a capacity for greater flexibility maybe make you more open to trying out different things and might increase your bisexuality? And maybe both in some kind of feedback. So these are the kinds of questions I'm interested in, how sexuality relates to personality more generally. And this work is ongoing, and I hope in the not too distant future to be able to share these findings with you. Another minute left, and let's see. All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to this symposium, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all later. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. Take care.